Okay, so we're recording now. So I'm Scott Carey. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Chief Engineer of Applications and Technical Support with Sugars International. And we've just started doing these webinars. We did one a couple months ago. We're just going to try to do them approximately quarterly, just to help people kind of get tips and tricks and learn a few new things about sugars and what it's capable of. Um, the topic of this one is for learning about the XML import export function. That's an optional feature for sugars. We get a lot of questions about what is it, how does it work, what's the purpose of it. So I'm going to spend a little time discussing that today and show a couple of examples on how to use it. And if you guys have questions as we go, please don't hesitate to ask. That's part of the beauty of these live webinars, is that we are able to answer questions and clarify things. And then hopefully we won't be more than about a half hour here. I know everyone's busy, don't want to take up too much of your time. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like we have at least about 10 attendees right now and may pick up a few more as we go. But in any case, so what is the XML import export function in sugars? Really what it was designed for is a way to transfer data into and out of sugars in a standardized format that's recognized by or can be recognized by other third-party programs. The original development was done in cooperation with a customer that wanted to basically insert actual factory data into a sugars model, run the model, and then export that data back out and do comparative analysis. And so it really relies on the customer to have some sort of third-party software that either they've written or some partner of theirs has written to communicate with this XML data file format. XML has been around for a long time. It stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's just a structure for putting together information in a computer file. I can show you one. They'll just open in Internet Explorer, and this one right here. Can everyone see my screen? I just opened up a file. It's got some red text, some black text, some maroon. Please let me know if it's not showing up. But basically you can see that there's a structure to it, and in this case we're looking at a sugars XML export file. So there's equipment, port number, and then the property names and their values listed in this specific structure. So if you're going to write a program to interact with this, you would need to know this structure and write your program accordingly. And there are XML parsing APIs and things out there that you can use for that. Okay, so now that we've seen what an XML file is, I'm going to show you how to produce one from a sugars model. So I'm going to open, this is the refinery example that's provided with sugars. I've just saved it over into another directory. Let me go ahead and move that over here. Okay, so this is a full model of a sugar refinery. So it includes everything from the raw sugar input to the white sugar crystallization and all the other sections of the factory. So you can see we have an affination and purification page, an evaporation page, a crystallization page, remelt station, and steam and water distribution page. So bringing up the sugars ribbon up here, you can see that amongst all of the options and functions within sugars, we have the import-export feature right here, these little purple arrows left and right. So if I click on that, I get a dialog box here. And it gives you the option to import an XML file, which would bring data into the sugars model, or export an XML file, which takes the data that's present in the model and puts it out to an XML data file. Okay, so I'm going to do one real quick here. Refinery export test one. And I'll go here, hit export data, and the status tells me that the export succeeded. Okay, so now if I exit here, in order to read that XML file, there's two things I can do. Number one, I can just open it like I did a minute ago. And you'll notice that there's nothing but some title information here and information about the schema. The other way I can open that file is with some other program that's been written to parse out the information. But first I'm going to explain why we didn't see any data in that. And the reason was Sugars is programmed only to export the data that you choose, because if we exported all of the data, every parameter for every stream and every station in the entire model, then your XML file would end up enormous, and it would have a lot of information that you don't really need. So the XML import export feature has been set up with a sort of switch to turn it on and off. So what that is if we open a station, for instance, this is the blender that the raw sugar enters the model into. So this is the first place that raw sugar comes in the model. You'll notice that it has a name, but the equipment ID section is blank. Equipment IDs in sugars have always been an optional field that you could enter just to keep track of equipment in your factory. If you wanted to give it an ID associated with some label out in the factory, you could give it that. But in this case, with the XML import function, the equipment ID serves as a switch. So if I give this station an ID, so I'm going to call this raw blndr for blender, click OK. Now because it has a station ID, the XML import export function knows that it needs to export the data associated with that station. And the way that works is that any station with an ID, if it has an external flow entering the station, in this case that's raw sugar, I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see it better. Raw sugar is the external flow coming into this station. That will be exported because this station has an ID now. And any internal flow leaving the station will be exported. So this output flow from the mingler, its data will also be exported because this mingler has an ID. If we gave an ID to a station that did not have an external flow coming in, then only the output flows from that station would be exported. So for instance, in this syrup heater right here, if it had an ID, it would only export data for this output flow of syrup and this output flow of condensate. And I'll show you in a second how that turns out. But I also want to give one more station ID while we're here in the model. I'm going to go to crystallization. I'm going to go to the sugar screen because I want the information for the output sugar produced. So if I come to this and give this SUGSCRN, give it an ID, now we have an equipment ID on this sugar screen, so it's going to export the output flow data on the sugar leaving. Okay, so we're going to come back to the import export feature, and I'm going to go and choose again the export test file name. I'll just overwrite it and export the data. Now we see that the export succeeded. And I'm going to exit there, and we'll come and we'll open that file again. And now the file has flow data in it because we gave equipment IDs to those stations that we wanted to see the external input flows to and the internal output flows from. Okay, now again, this is sort of hard to read. It's just a data file. So what if we want to actually make use of this data? Okay, Well, we at Sugars, just as an example of how you can make use of this data, we have developed a Excel macro within an Excel spreadsheet workbook to import and export this data so that you can see how it works. So what we've done here is there's kind of a control page here called the import or export data page. It gives some instructions on how to use it. There's an external flow view. So this page will contain all of the external flow data that's in the XML file. There's internal flow view. This contains all the internal flows data that come in the XML file. And station view will contain the station data for any of those stations that have a equipment ID. So I'm going to come back over here to the control page here, and I want to import data from a Sugars model. And it's going to ask me, am I sure? Because it's going to clear everything out of those pages before I do the import. Yes, I'm sure. So it cleared everything out. Now I need to go find my file. I'm looking for the XML file that I saved, which is here. It was refinery export test 1, and I'll click open. And if you could probably not see it on the online view there, but it flashed through each of these screens and it filled in all the data. So now if we go to the external flow view, we can see that the external flow coming into port 0 and on the raw blender station has all of its properties listed here. So this is that raw sugar entering the model, the pressure, the temperature, the flow rate, and then the properties are given in the units in which the model is stored. So in this case, our model is in SI units, so the flow rate is in kilograms per hour, and pressures are in kilopascals, things like that. So then if we go to the internal flow view, you'll notice that we have several flows shown here. And that's because this is all the outputs from each of those stations that have an equipment ID. So the raw blender had one more output. So this is the syrup and sugar blend coming out of that blender. And then the sugar screen had two outputs, one being the sugar produced and the other, I think, being the overs that were scalped off the screen. And then if we go to the station view, we have the data from the two stations that had station IDs, one being a blender. So we have all the properties or parameters for that blender here, the raw blender. And then from the sugar screen, it's just a separator station, a distributor with percentage quantities split. So we get the percentages. I believe it was 95% to production sugar and 5% to rejects. Okay, so this file, this little macro program that we've built within this spreadsheet allows us to parse that data from the XML file that Sugars exported. Okay, I'm going to take a look at my notes here. Okay, so one thing that we can do with this little utility we've built in Excel is what if we want to change a value and then send it back to Sugars. So for instance, what if we wanted to reduce the flow rate of raw sugar coming into the refinery? So here we're going to change the flow rate on this raw blender input flow 0 from 75,000 to 74,000. Okay, so just made a small change there. Now if I come over to my control page, I have the option to export data to a Sugars model. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to call it Refinery Import Test 1 because I'll be importing this data back into the Sugars model. So I'll click Save the file, and it tells me that I have a successful export to that location. Export from Excel, and then we'll import it back into Sugars. Okay, so I'm back here on the Sugars model. And you notice right now it's balanced. We haven't changed anything in this model since I opened it. I'm going to open the Import-Export dialog box. Now, if you notice in the Import section of this dialog box, I can choose the file location that I want to import, and I can also choose a tolerance. Okay, and this tolerance, I'm going to set it to 1.0 in this case, 1%. And what that's doing is it's going to look through all the parameters in the file that's imported, and it's going to check for a 1% deviation between those parameters and the current values within the sugars model. If any deviation exceeds that 1%, then we'll be able to see it in the reports that are produced, and I'll show you those in a second. But first, I need to choose the file. It was refinery import test 1, and then import the data. Okay, and it's done, and I'm told that warnings exist, okay, in the status box. So let's go to the error report and see what the warnings are. And the font is pretty small here, I apologize. But what it says is that the external flow to station number 100, so that's the raw blender, so this is the raw cane sugar coming in. It says the value of 74,000 is less than the minimum tolerance of 74,250. Well, the 74,250 is 99% of the 75,000 that it was in the sugars model. So it found that our new value that we imported is less than, or it's great. The difference is greater than 1%. So that's what that tolerance is for, is to give you just a heads up, a warning to say, you know what, your value that's coming in is greater, the difference is greater than the tolerance. However, it says the imported property value was saved. So it was saved to the model. There's not a problem here. It's just giving us some information. I can also click on the comparison report, and you'll see that every parameter for every flow in the XML data import is listed. And if we look at the external flow, you'll see that the old value was 75,000, the new value is 74,000, and it gives a percent difference of minus 1.33. And if there were other differences, we'd see all of them listed here in this comparison report. Okay, so we know that something has changed. I'll go ahead and exit this dialog. And because we've changed one thing without balancing the rest of the model, you can see that the balance icon up in the sugars ribbon is red now. So in order to rebalance, of course, all we have to do, well, let's go back. I want to make sure everyone can see the raw sugar. This value hasn't updated because we haven't balanced yet. But if we click on the actual flow stream, you can see that the flow now is no longer 75,000, it's 74,000. That's the imported value. Okay, now we can balance the model, and the displayed value is updated, and all of the rest of the model values are updated based on that reduced input. So that's just kind of an example of really simply how you can set up a model to do the export to XML, and then utilize a third-party program, in this case Excel, to import the data from that XML file, do some sort of manipulation with it, and then re-export it and re-import it back into sugars with the changes. So at this point, I have another example that will show a little bit more of an application of this method, but I just want to open up to questions real quick. If anybody has anything, you can either unmute your microphone and just speak up, or you can use the little chat function in GoToMeeting. If anybody has any questions, please feel free. Okay, well, it looks like no questions at this point, so we'll go ahead and forge ahead. So I'm going to go ahead and close this model. I'm not going to save the changes. I don't need to today. And I'm going to close the Excel book. Okay, so for the next example, we're going to use the beet factory example that is included with sugars. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And this is a full factory model. Accounts for everything from cassettes entering the diffuser system through purification, crystallization in a three-stage boiling scheme, 5 effect evaporator station, steam and water, including the boiler and the turbine generator. And this model also includes a little embedded Excel sheet with some summary information. But for what we're doing today, I've actually developed a little bit of a modified version of the spreadsheet that I showed you a few minutes ago. So we'll open that, and this is essentially the same import-export spreadsheet, but we've added a sheet, and I've called it report. Okay, and so this is an example of how you might take information from a daily factory operating report and include it in a spreadsheet like this. So in this case, we have some input values, and this is mind you, it's very simplified. I realize that most factories with their operating reports have many more parameters and much more information than this. I just wanted to show a few things here in order to give you the idea of what the capabilities are. So the input values that we have from this this hypothetical report are the total tons of beets sliced in a day, the average cassette sugar content from that day, the cassette purity, the cassette temperature, and the cassette mark, which is the percent insoluble solids in the cassettes. And then we also have some output values, as I'm calling them, and these are things that also come from the report. This would be the lime usage and purification, the sugar production from crystallization, the molasses production as well, total steam usage, and the steam on beets percentage. So that's the steam usage divided by the beets processed. So with this information from a report put into this spreadsheet, I can come, and what I've done is I've already set up this spreadsheet with the external flows and internal flows and stations. In fact, in this case, all we need is the external flow of cassettes coming to the factory. But I've set this up so that it's in the right format to create an XML file with the data for the cassettes coming to the factory. So in the report, we had the tonnage, the sugar content, the purity, the temperature, and the mark. In this external flow view, I'm actually calculating the kilograms per hour flow rate based on that tonnage. I'm calculating the water content, the dissolved sucrose, and the dissolved non-sucrose based on the data from that report. And I'm calculating the fiber, it's just copied over, as well as the temperature. Okay, so if we bring that report data to this spreadsheet and we have it in this format, now we can come to export the data to a sugars model. Okay, so I'm going to come here and I've got to navigate again. Documents. Okay, so we're going to call it Beet Factory Import, and I'm going to give it today's date so we know which one it is. And I'll save it. Okay, I need to check. We have to make sure that, yeah, so one thing about exporting from this little Excel application is we have to make sure and add the .xml extension. It doesn't do it automatically, so I'm going to do that there. Okay, now it's an XML file. So I come to the model, and right now you can see that the cassette flow is 250,000 kilograms per hour, and it's 17.34% sugar in the cassettes and some other parameters here. But if I come here and I import the data from that file right here, 03818. Okay, so it's giving me a couple of warnings. And that's because the flow of cost sets was outside the tolerance, but there's no other problems. It's just letting me know that it was outside the 10% tolerance. Okay, so now if I click on the cost set flow, you'll notice it's reduced to the value that we had in the export from Excel, and so is the sucrose and everything else. Okay, so now I'm going to balance this model with this new set of cost set input values. Okay, so now the model is rebalanced with all those new values. Now I've set up this model with equipment IDs on all the stations necessary to compare values to that report that I showed you a few minutes ago. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go again to Import Export, and I'm going to export the data from this now rebalanced model. So I'm going to call it Beat Factory Export, but I'm going to change the name.
Good.
Hello, do we have a question?
Okay. They say 11 o'clock.
I can't really hear. Okay, I apologize. I can't hear you. So if you have a question, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll continue on.
Hey, Scott, I couldn't get on a computer, just on a phone. I don't know why this happened. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, okay, no problem. So we're saving the Beat Factory export file with a name so that we remember it. Export data, and it says the export succeeded. So I'll close this dialog. Now I have a slightly different Excel spreadsheet that I use. I'll go ahead and close the one I had open and open this one that I'm calling the report comparison. Okay. Once this opens up, you'll see that it's just a little bit different, and the purpose of it is to compare the sugars modeled values for the outputs to the actual report values. So you'll notice there's a sugars column for the output values and a variance section here as well. I'm going to go ahead and just, let's see, on the internal flow view, I'm just going to clear out all these values so you can see on the report page now all the values are clear. Oh, I guess we had an external flow of lime as well to the Slaker blender. So right now we don't have the data from sugars, we just have the report data. So if I come over here and I import data from the sugars model, that clears everything anyway, but I'm going to go ahead and open that right here. So we're going to open today's Beat Factory export. And you'll see it goes through and it fills in all that data. So in this one we have quite a few more stations with station IDs, so there's a lot of data that comes in, especially for internal flows and station views. But now if we go to the report, I'm reading those values, and some of them I have to make some conversion calculations. Like for instance, in order to get the total daily tons of lime to compare to the report, I have to take the value from that lime flow in kilograms per hour and multiply by 24 and divide by 1,000 to get tons. These is metric tons in this case. But what you can see is that now we have the modeled output values from the sugars model to compare to the actual report data, or in this case it's hypothetical report data from the factory, and a variance column showing percent change between the two. So in the case of lime usage, the factory used 6.3% more lime than the sugars model predicted. And that could be because the lime quality wasn't as good that day, or the operators were just using more than was necessary, or possibly something's changed in the process and the sugars model isn't accurate anymore. But the bottom line is this gives you the opportunity to compare actual factory operation to the modeled factory in sugars, and then see the differences, and that kind of helps steer operations personnel to where there might be problems, where there might be issues that need to be addressed. And again, this is just an Excel spreadsheet with some macros built in to read that XML file. But if you had another third-party piece of software with your data in it from your factory, you may be able to write a program in that software to read the XML file and compare the data. So really, it's just the XML data import and export feature within Sugars just kind of opens the window, opens the door from other programs to Sugars and back. So that's what its purpose is, and I hopefully have given you a good overview of how it works. Again, I'll open this up to questions here now. This is about all I have to show, but for those listening in, if you have any questions, please feel free. Okay, so I have a question. Is the XML import export file available to us? And the answer is we can make it available. If you would like it, I can just send that spreadsheet to you in an email. And again, it's a macro built into the spreadsheet, so you'll have to make sure that your macros are enabled to use it. And we'll just yeah, and then anything else you want to do with it, any reports or anything, you'll have to add on to the spreadsheet once you have the basic import and export functionality. Okay, any other questions? All right, I'm getting a few requests for that spreadsheet, so I'll make sure and get those. What we may do actually is send out a download link to the group that was registered for uh, this webinar. So we'll figure out a way to distribute that so that everybody has access to it. And in any case, I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. We'll have another one probably within a few months. We'll pick a new topic. One thing that's coming up this year is our release of Sugars 4.1, which will be a major update to the code to utilize Microsoft's .NET platform. Performance will be improved, and we'll have compatibility with Microsoft Visio 2016. So we're really looking forward to that, and so at least at some point soon, one of the webinars will probably just be focused on that and what the updates and changes are. And also, we've got the LinkedIn account activated again for Sugars International, so we'll be posting updates about what's going on in the company and future webinars and things like that on LinkedIn. So if you're interested, follow us on LinkedIn. And we'll post this presentation on YouTube and make the link available to the group so that if you want to refer back to it later, you can. And again, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch again later.